Hello everyone, how's everybody doing today? I hope you're doing just fine, like me. I'm doing fine. Today I was going to talk about what I've been talking about for the last couple weeks, and that is I was going to talk about the ether, the nature of our universe, whether it's, specifically space, what is it made out of or made of. And I was going to talk about, obviously, nothing. Subject which I have been talking about now, like I said, maybe a couple, 2 or 3 weeks. But today I've got to make another detour and got to be sidetracked a little bit because I received a couple comments. And the comments, I think, are important to address them before continuing because people have maybe the wrong idea of what this site is about. I want to clarify that so that I don't waste your time specifically. Maybe you're here and you came across the site and you think it's business as usual. And believe me, one thing I want to make absolutely clear here: this is not business as usual. And that's what I want to cover today before we can continue on some other stuff, because that way I can save you a lot of time in the questions that you might come up with. If you know already what the site is about, you say, oh, I shouldn't ask that question because he's already kind of answered it by telling us what the site is about. What were the comments? Well, one of the comments was last week, at least, or last time, I said that atheism is not a part of science. And, I had to, and I'm going to show the little diagram there, but they saw that atheism as well as agnosticism were under religion. Maybe I made a mistake. And they would rather have that, on the rational science side. And then the other issue was related to my book, and that's the title of it is Why God Doesn't Exist. People say, well, there seems to be a contradiction. You say why God doesn't exist. Sounds quite atheistic, and you're saying that atheism is not a part of science. So those things need to be clarified before we continue, because remember, the name of the site is Rational Science. I'm telling you, it's not business as usual over here. So I want to clarify all that. I think it's important. Anyways, before I begin, I want to make sure that everybody is aware that we have a conference in Bora, Sweden on June the 8th. That's 2019. We're going to see some very nice, very interesting people, smart people. And so I welcome you to come. You're going to be able to test your theories there with very smart people. And so, yeah, I would urge you to go there because you're going to have a lot of fun talking to these people. Anyways, I want to make a point of reminding everybody we're only 2 months away, so if you're going to go, make plans, okay, make your reservations, whatever you need to do. Okay, so what is the issue? Well, this is my book, Why God Doesn't Exist. And it's a heavy book, 500 pages. It's a monster. Why is it called Why God Doesn't Exist? Well, that's a little bit of a long story. And yeah, I got to tell you a little bit about myself in order to get to that point, because, people may not know where I'm coming from with all this. And specifically, we got this issue where, people ask, well, what is science? Rational science. Here I'm proposing that this is rational science. That means there's another kind of science which is not rational. And I'm saying that specifically what we are taught in high school, college, we are taught that science is about doing mathematics. Mathematics is the language of science, of physics. We do experiments. We make predictions. We do observations. We verify and falsify theories that are not true. We do all these things. And I'm saying none of it belongs in science. So again, this is a different sight. If this is what you were taught in high school, this is what you have in the back of your mind, then you're one of the two, you either came to the wrong place or you're gonna get a different version here if you stick around. And it doesn't mean you have to believe or accept what I'm proposing here. What I'm saying is, I want you to know what this site is about so that maybe I don't waste your time. Now, in science, we do not do mathematics. And you say, well, what do you mean? How can you say that? Yeah, we do not do mathematics. Why? Well, because we start with the definition. And the definition of science, listen to the definition because that's important, okay? Definition of science here for this site is rational explanations. Rational explanations, okay? So if we're going to be doing rational explanations, how does mathematics fit into that? Well, it doesn't. It doesn't because mathematics can only describe any equation, every equation ever devised in the history of humanity. All equations, all they can do is describe. It's a description. That's what an equation is. It's a description. You can't explain anything with math. And so we have the definition of rational science, of what I call science, but we have to put the word rational to distinguish it from what the mathematicians do. And I'm saying, this is rational explanations. Mathematics does descriptions. No, they don't match. So we just follow the definition. I mean, if we're going to define the terms, we have to keep, strictly with the definition. We can't just change it at our leisure and say, well, yeah, that's the definition, great, but I'm going to introduce math. No, you can't, because the definition says rational explanations. Okay. So that might offend a lot of people. It might turn off a lot of people because you say, well, I was educated this way and this is what I learned. This is what I believe in. Fine. I'm just telling you what we do here. We do rational explanations. Okay. What does that mean? It means that we're going to explain a phenomenon objectively so that you understand the mechanism. Okay. The interest here is for you to understand the mechanism. Whether you believe in it or not, that's your personal business. It's your personal religion. Everybody's got his own personal religion. Fine. But we're just going to explain things. And mathematics has no purpose whatsoever in the world of explanations. Do we do experiments? No, we don't do experiments. In science, we do not do experiments. How can you say that? Yeah. What did I just say? Rational explanations. Science, we do not do experiments. We explain them. Okay? I was an engineer for many years. And I had technicians working for me. They went out there and they did the legwork. They were the gophers. They went out there, did some tests, brought back the information. And I analyzed the information, then said, okay, let's do this, let's do that. The engineer in that sense is more or less like a scientist. I worked in the production area of a company. I maintained a production line. So if you had a problem, the line was shut down, the company was losing money. So you had to get your buns on the problem immediately because every second counted. And but the legwork was done by the technician. He's the guy who goes out there and uses his hands. Now, I use my hands too, by the way. I did a lot of experiments myself. All I'm saying is that science, we do not do experiments. We do not drop the pen 100 times to find out, what gravity is. That's not the way we do it in science. In science, we sit back and do armchair physics, armchair science. We sit back and we think. We try to visualize the mechanism of gravity. For that, you have to visualize what invisible entity Mother Nature is using to accomplish her goals, okay, to do her daily chores. And so, no, we don't do experiments. I mean, if you drop the pen 1,000,000 times, does that mean you're going to identify or figure out how gravity is done? Yeah. I mean, how many experiments have they already run? They still don't know what gravity is. They can't explain. How many times have you seen a magnet attract another? 1,000,000 times maybe? Or, lots of people have done that experiments over and over and over. Have they learned because of doing the experiment? Have they learned how a magnet attracts another, what the physical mechanism is of action at a distance, or how it repels it? No, of course not. So doing experiments does not give you an insight. You could be a Down's patient and do experiments all day long. Does that mean that because you don't have a mind for it that you're going to figure it out? That you're going to figure out how what caused the experiment to happen in a certain way? Of course not. So experiment is not part of the scientific method. You can do whatever experiment you want to prove stuff to yourself to get an idea. That's fine. When you come to the conference, we don't want to hear your experiment about it. We want you to tell us what the mechanism is, what you learned. We want you to tell us objectively what the mechanism of that phenomenon is. Okay. Do we do verification? No, we don't verify anything. Verification means that you're going to prove something to yourself. You're going to convince yourself. You're your own jury. You're a prosecutor talking to yourself. We don't verify anything. We explain. Okay? Do we do predictions? We don't do predictions. That's astrology. In science, we do not do predictions. We just do explanations. And what people don't understand is that a prediction is just a description. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, there's going to be an eclipse. Did I explain anything? No, I just made a prediction of what's going to happen. Now, if I'm able to explain why, now I'm going back in time and I'm going to my experience. I'm searching into the past for the experience of why something happens the way it is. That means it's already happened. I'm rerunning the movie again. So that's not a prediction. The explanation part of a futuristic event means it's already happened. You've got experience with it. Doesn't have to be that same specific incident, but it means you have already come up with something in the past that you have experience with it, just either because you studied books or you actually done the experiment or whatever. So no, a prediction is just a description. Unless there's an explanation for it, in which case you are talking about the past. You're talking about a consummated event that you've already experienced in some way. Okay. What other thing? Experiments, predictions, verification. We don't falsify anything. Forget about Karl Popper. We don't do falsification. That's, again, it has to do with convincing someone of something. Of saying, I'm gonna convince you that that's false. So I'm going to twist your arm. No. In science, we explain objectively. You can even say angels. Angels move the magnets together. Fine. Okay, that's as long as I understand what this guy is proposing. I understand the mechanism he's got in his head. And fine, that's his explanation. That's what he believes in, maybe, right? Doesn't mean I have to believe in it. I just need to understand what he's proposing. And then, everybody selects the explanation he likes the best. And it becomes your religion. Okay? So no, we don't do any of that. We don't do predictions. We don't do verifications. We don't run experiments. We don't use math. None of that belongs to science. So if you come here with that idea that, you've been educated that way and this is what you learned in high school and college and this is what everybody out there believes in, fine. Go with the crowd. This is a different site. And we're saying this is different because for the first time we're proposing that science is about rational explanations. That's the first one. The second one is that physics, which is a branch of science, together with the other branch, which is philosophy, physics, which is what we deal with here, physics deals with objects. First and foremost, you need to have an object. You can't do physics without an object. And that's key. That's like the first principle, what I call the golden principle. You can't do physics without an object. And some people say, well, yeah, sure, okay. I mean, that's common sense. It's like a no-brainer. Why did you even mention it? Well, I'll tell you why I mentioned it. I'll tell you because for the last 10,000 years, no one's been doing physics with objects. That's the first one. The second one is no one has ever defined the word object. Not a single book of physics, textbook of physics on the planet, current or past, has ever defined the word object or begins by defining what an object is for the purposes of physics. You would think that the first page would say, this is an object, and you absolutely need an object to do physics. And I challenge you to come up with any textbook of physics where it says that, where it starts by defining what an object is and why it's necessary. And that's the other part, the part that no one's ever figured out. You know, that the word object is important, that you need to define it for the first purposes of physics. That's the first word you need to define. If physics is done with objects because you can't do physics without an object, you absolutely need to define the word object. And no one's ever realized the importance of objects or of defining the word object for the purposes of physics. So we got several things here. First, science is about rational explanations. That's revolutionary. That's new. No one's ever thought about that. Everybody's been doing whatever, mathematics, verification, convincing, persuading, recruiting, doing experiments, falsifying. They've been doing everything except what they should be doing. Explanations, objective explanations for phenomena. That's the first one. Second one, no one discovered ever that you need an object to do physics. Everybody kind of, yeah, you need an object, let's get on with it. No one ever formally took the trouble to define what an object is very precisely for the purposes of physics. And they didn't do so because they never realized the importance of objects in the context of physics. So this is new. It is new because you won't find it out there. And if you find something out there that shows that objects are important and that someone defined it and showed that it was very important for the purposes of physics, well, I'd like for you to get back with me and show me where it has been written. In fact, you might as well write it verbatim so that there's no, with a date, when that was, published or whatever. Okay, yeah, so this is a new site as far as physics is concerned because we're going to do physics with objects. We're only interested in objective explanations for phenomena. We're not interested in math. We're not interested in verification, falsification, experiments, or none of that nonsense that they have today in so-called mathematical physics. And that physics word is too big for that, term. Okay, so what is science? Well, science is rational explanations, as I said a minute ago, and it's divided into two parts, physics and philosophy. Physics deals with objects, causes, and mechanisms, and you should be able to explain something objectively. Now, on the right-hand side, under religion, again, you will find atheism and agnosticism, together with theism. Okay, you have all these traditional religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, etc. And they're together, I bunched them up together with atheism and agnosticism. And man, that's got to really upset a lot of people who say, look, I thought I was a rational individual. And you're telling me that atheism, which is obviously rational, you're telling me that it's irrational, that it's not part of science, that it's not scientific? And the answer is no, it's not. And one way to look at it is to see how atheism is defined. And atheism is defined in, I think I've got it here. Yep. This is the Wikipedia, says disbelief or lack of belief in the existence of God or gods. And American Atheists, I love it because they have the atom there, the quantum atom, the ridiculous quantum atom. Says atheism is not an affirmative belief that there is no God. Atheism is not a disbelief in gods or a denial of gods. It is a lack of belief in gods. And as you can see, we can't get away from that word belief, no matter what we do. Belief, disbelief. And so let's put back up what science is so that we find the word belief. Let's see where we find it. Well, where do we find it? We find it under opinions and beliefs on the right-hand side under religion. That's where we find beliefs. So whether you believe or don't believe or have lack of belief or whatever, it doesn't matter. You're doing religion. In science, we don't introduce opinions. We don't say God does not exist or God does exist or I don't know if God exists. Or I'm going to run a test to see if God exists or not. We don't do any of that. In science, we do it very simple. And for that, you need to understand the scientific method. Let me put that up here so that we have reference. What's the first step? Hypothesis. What is a hypothesis? It's the set of assumptions that you're going to use, okay? That you're going to introduce so that someone can follow your train of thought, so that someone can understand your theory. And yeah, you need the initial scene, statement of the facts, but you need objects and you need to have solid definitions, especially of the terms that make or break your theory. And as you can see, there's no provision for beliefs in there. What we do is we put assumptions. And what is an assumption? Well, at least in the context of God, right? In the context of God, you can have a theory about God, scientific theory. And you say, scientific? Well, more or less, not totally scientific, but to some degree, it follows the scientific method. Whether it's going to be scientific depends on other factors as well. So I'm not going to say that it is scientific. All I'm going to tell you is the following. The way you present your case in favor of God is you say, let us assume that God exists. You don't tell the crowd, look, God does not exist. Or God exists. I've proven it. Or I've verified it. Or I don't know if God exists or not. I don't know what test I can run to prove his existence. Now, that's not the way we do it in science. In science, we say, let us assume that God exists. And you're referring, hopefully, to the man upstairs, right? The bearded guy, old guy, magic wand in hand. And so you say, yeah, let us assume that God exists. And then you can explain your theory. Let me tell you how God created the universe. Fine. But God, existence cannot be a theory. Okay? So if you're an atheist and you say, well, I don't believe that God exists, you're not making a scientific statement. You're just giving us your opinion. And we don't care if it's justified or not. That's separate, irrelevant. The issue is that you cannot begin your presentation saying, I don't believe that God exists, or I lack belief in God. They twist this around so many times because they don't know how to say it, because none of it is science. That's why they have to twist it around so much. It's very simple. If you're an atheist, you can even present God. You can say, let us assume that God exists. And you can present your theory. And you can even present your theory showing that, God could not have done this or could not have done that. But the way you begin, you would say, let us assume that God exists. Now, let me show you by contradiction or any other way, that it's an impossibility. That's the way it's presented in science. Okay? And so to say that I'm an atheist and, I've proven that God does not exist or I believe or whatever, no. And the agnostics are the worst ones. They say, well, I don't know if God exists. Again, first of all, it's an opinion. Second, it's an unscientific statement. In science, we do not know. Science is not about knowledge. Science, what was it? Explanations, not knowledge. Knowledge is, in fact, the word science comes from the word knowledge, sire, from the Latin. And in the old days, people thought, science was knowledge. Now, for that, you have to define the word knowledge. And as I've shown in a couple videos in the past, I'm not going to go through that now, but no one's ever defined the word knowledge. Look it up. See if you can find out what knowledge is. They don't know. And when you look it up, you finally end up with Mr. Plato's definition of knowledge: justified, true, belief. So knowledge is just a belief. Your belief, that you believe in something. So it all comes down to belief. And none of that is science. That's why, we don't deal with knowledge. We don't deal with belief, predictions. None of that belongs to science. Not in this side. You don't have to agree. But that's what we do here in this site. So keep that in mind before you ask questions, because you may be thinking that this is business as usual here, and it's not. Okay. So let me tell you something, because if science is rational explanations, you might say, well, rational sounds like your opinion. What is irrational? What is rational? What's rational to me is irrational to you. Well, that forced us to come up with objective criteria for the definition of rational. I like to define it in terms of irrational, which is the opposite antonym. That's fine. And here you have it. Irrational. The main one is the first one: conversion of concepts into objects and pretending to move them around. You take love, you convert it into heart, and now you start moving the heart. And you say, well, hold it, what are you moving? Oh, I'm moving love. No, you're moving a heart. What you did was morph. With a magic wand, you morphed a verb into a noun, and now you treat this noun as a physical object for the purposes of physics again. We've got tons of examples. Space-time, is time a physical object? You take space, three-dimensional space, you tie it to time, and you create a four-dimensional object, unimaginable, obviously. You take a rock, three-dimensional rock, plus 2 o'clock, and you turn it into a four-dimensional rock. Is that what it is? Rock time. The word point, undefined to this day. Nobody knows what a point is. Why? Very simple. You put a dot. You say, okay, there's a dot. You call it a point, and then you do your presentation with ordered pairs, locations, concepts. Not with a geometric figure you just put in front of my eyes. So we have all these terms. Field. What is a field? Anybody know what a field is? Of course not. Never been defined. Guy who created it, Faraday, he created the word field in the 30s, 1830s, wrote about it, I think, for the first time in like 1844, 1845. And he never defined it. He just said, look, it's this region around a magnet does these weird things, and I'll call it a field. And since then, nobody's defined it. In fact, what they did, they extrapolated it to gravity, and they said, oh, now we have a gravitational field. So we have all these fields, the muon field, the electric field, and the magnetic field. We have all these fields, and they're all living in the same space, and nobody, challenges that. Everything's okay. So, yeah, they turn concepts into objects, and that's a big, big problem. You can't do that in physics. You can't turn love into heart. You can't take location and turn it into a point. You can't take time and say you're going to warp it. What did you warp? 1 second? Is that what you bent and twisted or whatever? So this is the issue. The issue is that it's irrational to take a concept and turn it into a physical object. And that's objective. That's not my opinion. You may not like it, but, those are objective criteria. And of course, we've got a couple more here. Let me just go briefly over them. The first one is using terms inconsistently during the dissertation. And the other one is that the theory doesn't follow from the assumptions. Okay. And there's a couple more, but those are the main ones. So we have, you can go over them later on, and you might have questions. I don't know. The point here is that we have objective criteria for what is rational and irrational. And if science is about objective, rational explanations, anything that's outside of that falls outside of science. So if you're going to talk about black holes, zero-dimensional, singularities that have all this mass and no volume, well, you get an irrational theory. And if you talk about dark matter, translucent stuff, you can't even draw it on the board because you don't know what a dark matter, one little dark matter looks like. Well, you can't even start your presentation. I don't know what you're talking about. What is this dark matter? Oh, it's a bunch of kilograms. Yeah, no wonder you can't draw it. I can't draw a kilogram either. I can put the kg in there, but not. But what am I going to draw for a kilogram? And so this is the issue. These people are turning concepts into objects, and then they say, well, this kilogram affected that star over there. These bunch of kilograms. Not in science, maybe in religion. And so these are the things you have to keep in mind, okay, that there is a set of criteria for what is rational, what is irrational. And you might ask, well, Bill, the problem is that, you're a theist in disguise. You believe in God, and so now you're trying to convince us that atheism is wrong. And I'm not going to buy it. Well, let me tell you what the story is. I got to tell you a little bit about me and to go over this. And that's why, I had to today suspend or postpone what I was going to talk about, the transverse waves, etc. Because it's important for you to know, what is and what is not science. And atheism, I want to make sure you understand it's outside of science. And I was an atheist for most of my life. Okay, I was an atheist for most of my life. And I wrote my book after being in prison. And when I went to prison, I found several people who discovered God. They discovered God in prison. When they were out there, they were selling drugs, prostitution, whatever, killing people. Now they come into prison, suddenly they discover God, and they become born again Christians or whatever. And I had Muslims and I had Christians, and we debated with them, debated religion. It was a lot of fun, believe me. They learned a lot, more than what I learned from them. And I'll tell you why, because before I went to prison, throughout my life, since I was a kid, I came from a very strong atheist family. More than strong, we were militants. We were militant atheists. So don't talk to me about atheism because I've been there, done that, okay? No, what happened was that, I was, some of you know, not all of you, I was born in Argentina, Buenos Aires. And I was a little kid. Well, I'm going to keep with just to answer quickly, Chris Quintana there, what did I do? You can look me up on Wikipedia and you'll find me there. Spying stuff. It had to do with spying, okay? And you can look me up over there. But anyways, I come from a militant atheist family, okay? And they were not atheists by birth. They grew up in families that were on my mother's side. They were Orthodox Christians, from the Russian Orthodox Church, from the Russian Orthodox. And on my father's side, they were Lutherans. They were from the other side. And so let me just go over real quick on that because I want you to get the full picture, so that you can follow me along. Okay. This is my family, my grandfathers. Fellow on the upper left, he was Russian. His name was Stefan. He was born in St. Petersburg, lived his life in St. Petersburg. And he was a military guy. He had an interesting life because he was in 3 armies. He was first in the Czar's army. He was born in 1894. So he was in the Czar's army. And Nicholas II, Nicholas the Last, the Romanovs, they were gone. By 1917, he was forced to abdicate. He was later murdered with his whole family. And my grandfather, he fought in World War I against the Germans. And he was in the army, but by 1917, 1918, thereabouts, many of the military guys, they switched sides. And they joined Trotsky's army, okay, the Red Army. And the unit to which my grandfather belonged suddenly, went and started working for Trotsky. He became part of the Red Army. One day he was given a leave of absence. He goes back home to his father and mother and brother. And, he arrives in St. Petersburg at his home, and he finds that a communist commissar has taken over his house. And they had deported his father and mother and his brother to Irkutsk, to a city in Siberia. They would send you off to Siberia. And because of that, today I have family in Siberia because of this incident. And my grandfather comes here. He comes from the military. He finds that a commissar, he's taken over the house, turned it into his headquarters. And when they have a little discussion there, and my grandfather shoots him and kills him. Just like that. He was a very rough, tough guy. Okay, so he runs away, and they chase him down. They capture him, bring him back, give him one of those quick trials. And together with 9 other fellows, they take him to a barn, and they execute them all. They put them in front of a firing squad, and they shoot them all. My grandfather wakes up 2-3 hours later, the only person alive. He's got 3 bullets in his body, and none of them critical. He goes to a friend's house, gets a doctor, gets cured. He had one of those bullets for the rest of his life, couldn't take it out. And he joins the White Army, a guy named Ataman Bulak. Ataman Bulak. You can look him up. Bulak was a colorful guy as well. Anyways, this is the White Army. They lose against the Red Army. The White Army disbands, and my grandfather ends up in what today is northern Ukraine. In those days, it belonged to Poland. My grandmother, on the other hand, she was Polish. And that's that lady on the left-hand side, which I've circled. And, when the war started, she fell on the Russian side, and they deported her within Russia. And she learned Russian. And after the war, she came back. She came back to her town, found that the German army had run over her house with their tanks and whatever, horses, whatever they had in those days. And she started working at a farm. And in that farm, she meets my grandfather. While she was in Russia, she had fallen in love with this guy named Victor, communist guy, atheist. And so, she fell in love with him, wanted to go back and see this guy. And my grandfather said, look, this is very simple. You marry me, I'm Russian, we go back to Russia, we get a divorce, and you can marry your dear old Victor. And my grandmother thought it was a good idea. She got married. And a few days later, she found out that a letter comes from Russia. It was Victor's sister sending a letter saying that he was shot down. Victor was shot down and killed by the communists. So much for comradeship. And she ended up married to my grandfather, and they had 2 kids, my mother and my uncle. And they went to Argentina in the 1920s when Argentina opened its doors to Europe. And they were part of the Orthodox Church, but they were nominally part of the Orthodox Church. Okay, and that's my mother there on the right-hand side standing behind my grandfather. Okay, on my father's side, they were Germans. They were from, my grandfather was from Magdeburg. My grandmother was from Frankfurt Oder, a city close to the border of Poland, not the Frankfurt where I'm at right now, which is Frankfurt Main. Right? And, they were barbers. Okay? And also in the 1920s, they went to Argentina. Pictures on the left are them in Germany. Pictures in the center are them in Argentina. My grandfather set up a shop there, a barber shop, and he did pretty good with that. And that's my father on the right-hand side. My grandfather wanted him to be a barber. Well, my father was no good for barbering. He was a technical guy. He wanted to do electronics. And radio was very big in those days. So he did a lot of radioing. He liked that stuff completely. And so he became an engineer and married my mother. And this is them. When he got married, on the left-hand side, you got a Polak, my mother, marrying a German. How's that for reconciliation? As you can see, that's my mother in her Orthodox dress when she got baptized. And so she comes from a religious background, but, they were just nominally Orthodox. Top the picture in the center there, that's us in Argentina before we go to the United States. Bottom picture is all of us in Baltimore, Maryland, a few years later. And there we met a lady who's on the right, and her name is Madeleine Murray O'Hare, and she's the founder of American Atheists. Okay, American Atheists. Some of you have heard of the American Atheists. So Madeleine used to come to our house. She came to our house a couple times at least in Baltimore, and she recruited us. My mother, she was, like I said, she was a militant. And she was one of the original members of American Atheists. So, I do have a background in atheism. We discussed atheism every day almost at home. We knew the ins and outs of religion, the arguments in favor, against. We had a long history of discussions at the dinner table. My mother would not serve dinner unless everybody was at the table. It was that strict. Okay, so I do have a background in atheism. And so to say that, somehow I became a Christian, no way. Or that I'm doing this to favor religion or something like that, no. I want to set the things straight. And the things straight are as follows. In science, we do not say, I believe in the existence of this chair. You don't believe in chairs. Okay? You can say, let us assume there is a chair, the one I'm thinking. Doesn't mean it exists. You're making an assumption. You're saying, let us assume there is a chair. And now you explain how the window broke. You say, look, Johnny took the chair, threw it through the window, and that's how the window broke. So you explained how the window broke by making an assumption about a chair that maybe no longer exists. Maybe the trash collector took it for all you know. It broke, someone threw it in a trash can, it's gone. So you don't say, I believe in the existence of a chair. I believe in the existence of this chair. You don't say any of that. Or I don't know if a chair exists. No. Existence is not an issue of belief. It's only part of the hypothesis. And again, let me put it back there again so that we get it right. There it is. Hypothesis, assumptions, that's the first step. You have to make an assumption in physics. You have to, you can present the exact thing if you want. You can say, here's the chair. You can take it to the conference, and present the chair and say, here's a chair. Fine, no problem. But you don't need to present the chair. You don't need to show the chair and, say, look, please believe in my chair. No, you just say, let us assume there's a chair, because you're going to explain a theory involving the chair. You present the object. What is the object? The chair, in this case, right? You can say, let us assume, like in my case, for the rope model, let us assume there's a rope, and that this rope binds any two atoms. Let us assume that all atoms in the universe are interconnected. It's an assumption. Do you believe in my assumption? No, you don't have to believe in my assumption. You need to concede my assumption so that I can tell you my theory, so that you can understand my theory. That's the point of the presentation, for you to understand my theory. You're not going to understand the theory if you say, well, I don't believe in your rope. Well, hopefully you don't believe in the rope. Here's a rope. Let's see. Here's a rope. Do you believe in my rope now? No, you don't believe in things. You believe in theories. Based, I tell you a theory objectively, a mechanism, and you might believe or not believe in the mechanism that I just explained. You might have a better mechanism. Fine. But in order to understand my presentation, my theory, you need to concede my assumption. You say, okay, let us assume for the sake of argument that your rope exists between two atoms. Let us assume that all atoms are interconnected. Then what? And now I explain my theory. That's the method of science. Okay? That's how you present a theory so that someone can follow what you're talking about. You don't do it like mathematical physics does. You don't say, space-time. What is space-time? Let's not worry about that. But look, if you warp space-time, you put a ball in there, you put the planet there, well, then you have this depression and everything falls down the hole. All the golf balls start rolling down the hole. So what do you mean by space-time? What is this object that you call space-time? Oh, it's unimaginable. You can't imagine it. Why? Because it's four-dimensional. And you can't really see or even imagine four-dimensional. In fact, Stephen Hawking says it straightforward. He says, it's impossible to imagine a four-dimensional space-time. And, it's true. I mean, no one can imagine four-dimensional space-time. Or if someone says, let us assume, or not assume, here is a black hole. And I'm going to explain why a star revolves around nothing. And there's a black hole in the center. It's full of mass, no volume, zero-dimensional, no radius, no size. And that big mass, that enormous mass, that infinite mass, or next to infinite, is what is drawing this star around it. And you say, well, hold it. I didn't see this black hole stuff that you talked about. I didn't see the singularity. Well, I can't show it to you because it's zero-dimensional. Well, yeah, that's like saying, I'm going to put a spirit there. I'm going to do it with a spirit. And how did the spirit affect the star? Well, he did it by magic. He just twirled his magic wand around and the star went around him. That's exactly what a black hole is. Black hole is a zero-dimensional singularity, a non-object, and with it, you're going to explain it through mass. Mass is a concept. So what you've done in reality is turn mass into a physical object. You've turned kilograms into an elephant. That's what you did. You turned tons into, hippopotamus. And now you're going to say that because the hippopotamus weighs the ground so much, the ants just can't help it but go around the hippopotamus. Can you draw the hippopotamus? No, because he's zero-dimensional. All we have is his mass. The hippopotamus is gone. All his matter was crushed out of existence. This is what these people are saying. So they don't have a physical interpretation. Of course, no one can understand or follow their presentation because they're not doing it rationally. They're not doing science. Okay? So this is what you got to keep in mind. This is the issue here. So getting back to atheism. Is atheism part of science? No. Not because the other option is to become a Christian or a Muslim or some traditional religion. No, that's not the option. It's not, oh, I'm either a believer or I'm a non-believer. No, those are not the options. There's a third option, not agnostic, that is also part of religion. The third option is, in science, we do not believe. Okay? We don't care about your belief. We're not here for you to tell me your belief, to try to convince me and recruit me into your religion. That's not what science is about. Science is about, let me explain to you a mechanism. Let me tell you how the bucket went up. So you pull on the cord through the pulley and the bucket goes up. That's the mechanism. Did you understand the mechanism? If you understood the mechanism, we're done with science. Do you believe that that's how the bucket went up? Well, that's your personal opinion. You know, you might have a different theory how the bucket ended up on the second floor. Maybe someone threw it up there instead of pulling it with a pulley. Maybe there are different explanations of how the bucket got up there. But each one has to be a mechanism that you can objectively understand. You should be able to make a movie of each one of these theories, each one of these mechanisms. And then you can choose the one you want. You say, well, I like this mechanism more than that. Fine. You like particles instead of the rope model? You like waves instead of particles? Fine. But you have to be able to explain a mechanism with objects so that people can see what the objects are doing. I mean, if you're going to explain how a car works, you know, are you going to introduce, well, we have so much energy and it's got so much force on the wheels and all this mass goes through? No, that's not how you explain how a car works. No, you would say, look, there's this liquid called gas, you know, gasoline. The fumes go through the car, get the pistons rolling, you know, and that moves the wheels. You explain it mechanically. That's how you explain, you know, how a car runs. And you can explain anything in that same way. You do not need to introduce words like force and field and energy and mass, concepts. You don't need time. I don't need to know how much time it takes for the gas to go from the tank to the motor. I don't need that in a car. I just need to know how the car runs. So what makes it run? What makes the wheels move? And so I can show all that mechanically. So this is the issue. The issue is that science, physics, right, as it relates to physics. This side deals primarily with physics. We deal very little with philosophy. But science deals or physics deals with objects. You should be able to make a movie of your theory so that I can watch the movie and you keep your mouth shut. I'll just watch the movie and see what you're offering. And I say, okay, I understand your mechanism. If I don't understand, I say, well, what about this and what about that? I mean, I didn't understand this part. And so the guy explains in more detail. Say, okay, this wasn't clear. Let me explain it to you. But I should be able to watch a movie and understand the theory. And we don't have that in science today. We don't have that in mathematical physics. Why? Because these people are going out there and saying, look, you know, I do things with energy. I do things with mass. And I do things with time and charge. You can't use those words in physics because those are concepts, right? And we don't do it with math either because we don't need to measure anything. I don't need to know how fast the pen drops to the floor. I need to explain the mechanism of what pulls the pen down there. I don't need to know what the acceleration of gravity is, for example. I mean, it's nice to know. It's a nice bit of detail to say, look, I can tell you what the acceleration of gravity is. 9.8 meters per second square. Okay, fine. What did that tell me about the mechanism? You see the issue? The issue is that we do not need math. We do not need verify. I don't need to verify your theory. That's only for my own belief. Like, well, I'm going to check this guy out, see if I trust what he says. But that's only for my religion. You know, maybe the guy tells me, let me tell you how a car works. Okay, how does it work? Well, the way it works is you have this spirit, and he's hidden in my tank, and he goes through the pipe, gets to the front, and turns the wheels. Okay, I understand your mechanism. I understand what you're telling me. So I go home now, and I say, well, I'm going to verify what this guy said, just for my own sake, for my own sanity. And I look through my car. I don't see the spirit. I don't see how the spirit does it. I'm saying, no, it's done with gas. So I have my own theory. I have a different theory than him. He's got a theory where he says there's a spirit in his car that does it all this. And I'm saying, no, I've got a gas that comes over here and goes to the front, makes the wheels. I've got a different explanation for the same thing. So do I believe in spirits? Do I believe in gas? Makes no sense to say I believe in gasoline. Okay, hopefully next time around, without interruptions, I'll be able to complete my dissertation about nothingness, about what is nothing, what is ether. Is ether a bunch of particles? Do these particles wave? In other words, is light a waving of the ether? Is there such a thing as ether? If there is, what is it? And it's got to do with the question that the mathematical physicists have, and that is that they can create something from nothing. That's where it all started, right? A couple of weeks ago. They say they created a universe from nothing. You go in there and you find out it wasn't really nothing, it was energy. And what is energy? Well, it's one of those undefined concepts that we don't care about. Just accept it on my oath. And so, we have a problem because these people are saying that it comes from nothing, and it turns out nothing is energy, and energy they have never defined, and they don't care about defining it, so you lost track. You don't know what these people are saying. Okay? And that's how we ended up first with the Greeks, and now we're up to Newton and Huygens. From there, we jump into the 19th century, essentially, and we get to some good stuff. 19th century was the age of ether. Age of ether. It's the age of transverse waves. And that all died 1900 with Mr. Max Planck. He comes up with the wave packet, or eventually, what is going to become the wave packet, the photon. And that's a different story. Anyways, next time around, without interruptions, hopefully I'll get to transverse waves, 19th century. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.